And my request is, while I drop in and lead the meditation, just to admit anybody into the room that needs to come on in as people come in.
Great.
I'm going to lead a short meditation just to help all of us drop in. And then we have some really remarkable people that you'll be meeting who are going to be sharing their stories, their wisdom, their expressions. So welcome, everybody. Welcome to all of you watching on Facebook. I want to appreciate all of our broadcast partners, and we're really glad you're with us. So I'd like to invite everybody to start by just closing their eyes. Let's just start with the breath. Breath is life. Breathing at your own pace. And I invite you to breathe in such a way that there's a space, maybe 2 or 3 beats, 2 or 3 seconds, between your inhale and your exhale. And again, a beat, 2 to 3 seconds between your exhale and your inhale. That space in between, the mystics call it the infinite void, where all things are possible. So as we're breathing and tuning into our body temples, what do you notice? Do you notice about your body? What's your body informing you of? It might be sensations, it might be some physical discomfort, it might be some emotions that are arising. This is such a tender topic. And all emotions are welcome. And anything going on in any of our body temples, it's just a signal. It's just a way of knowing as our body informs us. And we call upon the unseen forces, our guides, our angels, and a special call to our ancestors. And I ask for all of us to give thanks to our ancestors for the extraordinary sacrifices they made in order for us to have the freedom, the abundance, the independence that we all enjoy. Recognizing that our ancestors sacrificed their lives with just a dream, a vision for their offspring to have what probably was unimaginable to them. And we get to experience it at this time in our lives. And we also recognize that our ancestors didn't have the time or the tools to manage certain ancestral patterns. It might be an ancestral pattern of addiction, alcoholism, or sexual abuse, domestic violence. And so may we use the freedom and the independence that they have given us as a birthright to heal any family lineage, to heal and honor and understand any ancestral pattern that we carry. This is how we do our part in the cycle of life. Bless us that we may think before we speak, listen with open hearts and open minds, as we go beyond the castle walls of right and wrong, good and bad, and we all beat together in that field that Rumi spoke of, a field of compassionate understanding. I invite all of us into that field. Aho, Ashe. Amen. I'd like to invite either Sadiq or Kenzie to come on and share a little bit.
Okay. Can you hear me? Are you on?
Yeah.
So, first of all, good morning, everyone. Welcome. So, for this morning, there are a few pieces that we are working to weave into the tapestry of this sacred time together with Scott and his community, and the community that's come together through Earthwalk and through all of our different partners, allies, and friends. And on the higher level, what we're here to do today is to invite everyone into a journey. And that journey, from our perspective, sort of is an invitation of a shift of a perspective of how it is that we are choosing to orient around issues that are presented in front of us, traumas that occur in the world or within ourselves, whether it is coming from a very deep and personal level to global issues of trauma between nations, between religions, between ethnic groups, social groups, genders, so forth and so on. So part of what we are here to do today is to talk about what we refer to as the power of three. What does that mean? So in the world today, and one of the things the whole person convergence is talking about at length throughout the 12 days, today being day 3 of these 12 days, is the amount of polarity that is currently existing within the world, and the trauma that exists within each of the different realms within the world that's creating and causing that polarity to turn into violence. And what we are here to do today is to show a way to work with that polarity, to work with that duality, and to move from polarity to 3, to Trinity, to a space where by creating a triangle, it actually creates a view and a lens where all the voices can be heard. If you think about just simple systems like the United States government having an executive branch, a judicial branch, and a legislative branch, the purpose of those 3 was to create a space where all the people could be heard. And so it's sort of with that same concept that we are introducing through a movement that we will be launching that has been in the works for the last 2.5 years, but which we're in conjunction with Scott today, going to be working to take to a whole other level. And with the hopes to really allow this to spread all over the world to bring healing to millions, if not billions. And so, really quickly, the context that I want to provide with the Whole Person Summit. For those of you who have been participating with us in that, both Friday night and then yesterday, we painted the picture of wholeness. And what we did is we went through all 12 sectors of humanity as laid out by Barbara Marx Hubbard. Arts and culture, science and technology, infrastructure and resources, business and economics, learning and education, so forth and so on. All 12 sectors spelled out with the intention to create a map so we can understand the body of humanity. So if we can understand the body of humanity, from that place, we can then learn how to tend to the body of humanity. And so yesterday we took time and we went through that body and we asked, what would wholeness look like in each of those realms? Because If we want to create a whole and just society, it's really important for us as map makers, as creators in our life, to ask the question of what would that look like? Because if we don't ask what that would look like, well, actually, from my perspective, we'll never get there. And so we need to take the time to stop and to pause and to listen and to ask, is where we are at currently with arts and culture aligned with my values of wholeness? Is where we're at with science and technology aligned with my values of wholeness? Is where the world of business and economics currently is that aligned with our sense of wholeness and love? Or if it's not, how is it not? And based on that how do we then move from where we are today to where we are going? And what we're going to be talking about today, and the introduction of the Me 3 movement, the We 3 movement, and Tribe 333, 3 aspects of Earthwalk that are being launched with this entire whole person series in a way that we haven't before. We have been growing these steadily to set the foundation so we are prepared for a global launch, which is part of what we're doing today. And feeling very honored, Scott, that you said yes to joining with us in this moment and to help shift the conversation globally with the world from that space of duality to a space of voice, a space that allows for all. And so what we're going to be doing with today is we're going to start in a very personal realm. Before I go there though, again, when we look at all of those places and we see where those traumas are, where are the traumas in education, where are the traumas in politics, where is the trauma in environment, we can choose so many different ways for how we deal with that trauma. I spent years in the global peace movement. And after a while, I actually left. And I left the global peace movement, not because I didn't believe in peace. I left the peace movement because what I found was an anger movement and I found an agenda movement. It was very rare that I found people who were actually speaking for peace. And for me, what I mean by that is a world that serves you and me. And that means it serves your voice, it serves my voice. It serves your perspective, it serves my perspective. It's not a movement that says you are right or you are wrong and I am right or vice versa. It is a movement that is premised on the concept that we are here together. And if we're not here together, we're going to continue that same dynamic of polarization. And that's what we're here to tend to, is how do we move past that old perspective of creating movements that are about us and them, me and you, and how do we move beyond that? So when we deal with the issue of economics, when we deal with the Occupy movement, and Bernie Sanders is an example of talking about the 99% and the 1%, how do we deal with that perspective without making anyone wrong? How do we deal with that perspective from a place of love? How do we go into the education system? How do we go into all these places? Because we have a lot of issues. But if we go into those places from a place where we're trying to figure out who is the bad guy and who is the good ones, we've already lost, from my perspective. And so we're here today to, again, one, set that context, because starting at 1 p.m. Mountain today, we are going to begin a 6-day journey through the realms, 2 today, and then 2 every day through Friday. And we're going to be going into the pain points of every single realm. We're going to be asking, we have 72 luminaries led by 12 stewards, 6 representatives per 12 rounds. And we're going to be going into a deep dive discussion with people like Charles Eisenstein, Lynn McTaggart, Scott Katamis is one of the representatives, and many, many more. Brilliant wisdom keepers. And we're going to be diving in to each of those realms and asking what the pain point is. But differently from what is so commonly done, we're not going to be asking who is the problem. We're going to be asking how do we solve. We're going to be solutionaries. And so what we're doing today is we're showing how that can be done in a very intimate arena. And that arena being the Me3 movement, being sexual trauma. And I'm wondering if I can bring Mackenzie on.
Hello.
Can we spotlight her with me? Yeah, so 2.5, hi, good morning. 2.5 years ago, amidst the whole Me Too movement, I had shared a post, well, actually, kind of stepping back, about 13 years ago, I started a movement, or organ fellowship, actually, is probably the more appropriate way of stating it, called the Integrative Sexuality and Conscious Relationship Fellowship. And for years, worked with people, creating sexual integration circles, creating space for people to heal from their sexual trauma, creating space for people to talk about it, to talk about what happened to them or what they did or what they wanted, what they didn't want. And for years and years and years, I worked in that space and supported people to unveil their own personal history and backgrounds and so forth and so on. And future forward, I guess maybe about 8 years after initiating that work, the Me Too movement came about. And I remember the day really vividly, where I had not been tracking personally what was going on. And like meaning like what the origin point of Me Too was. Like I didn't know the history that it was a woman who had written that concept as a hashtag 15 years ago. I didn't know there were 2 female actors specifically referring to female sexual trauma and abuse. I did not know the context. All I saw were posts coming out on Facebook. And part of my story is that I was raped at 2 and 3 years old. I, again, was forced to have sex with my best friend at 6 and 7 years old. Before I hit the age of puberty, when I went back to count into my life of what had occurred, I had experienced sexual, like some sort of sexual experience with 18 people before I had even hit puberty. So the amount of exposure that I had in my life around this issue, it's pretty great. And when I saw those posts, obviously, it kicked up a lot of stuff for me. And I shared my own story. And I shared my story and I said, hashtag me too. And the response that I received blew me away, which was I ended up getting attacked left and right, saying to shut up, saying to be quiet, saying it wasn't my turn to speak. And I didn't know what to do because here as a man, with the experience that I had, and I've only shared a portion of the journey that I've had with sexuality. I didn't have a place to go, and it kicked up so much, and it pushed me into a place of asking so many questions, and basically being like, if the goal of us coming out on stage and sharing our stories and saying this happened is in fact for the sake of healing, what are we doing shooting people down for sharing their part of this universal global story of healing? And I'm not going to go into any more details now. I'll go into some of my story a bit later. But just to set the context a little bit of what brought me to my founding of what was my branch, my lineage, if you will, of the Me3 movement, is I wanted to create a space that provided a safe place for all points of the trauma triangle. So the reason I had initiated the Me3 movement 2.5 years ago was one, a play on words, Me Two to Me Three, going from polarity, duality, two to Trinity, to three, to a place that works for all. But also the three represents the victim, rescuer, and perpetrator. And can we provide a space of healing for all 3 points on that trauma triangle so we can all actually heal, so we can all move, so this does not continue in our society, or when it does happen, we know how to deal with it. So that was what initiated on Earthwalk's end, the Me3 movement, unbeknownst to me, at the exact same time in another part of the world. This beautiful creature, Kenzie, founded a Me3 movement as well. And I'm going to pass the torch over to her to have her share that story.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Unaware of Sadiq's movement. I also started a Me3 movement when I was 16 years old in high school. And that is a whole different culture of people because high schoolers are gnarly. Like it's like right in there with where the sexual trauma can happen. It's right in there with really, really uncomfortable, weird, unspoken about taboo sexual interactions. And in my experience and my own story with rape and sexual abuse and sexual violence and stuff like that, I was very, very young when it happened, similar to Sadiq, and have had multiple experiences. But for me, I was with like my main story that I hold as a part of what changed me a lot is when I was in a relationship with someone for a long time. And there was a part of me that was just like so in shock when he violated me that I didn't even believe it, because I still loved him and I still held a place for him and I still felt connected to him and I still felt traumatized by him. And I saw his humanity in who he was and how he worked in the world. I knew his own stories around sexual violence. And so I knew that he is traumatized, and I cut things off because that was a boundary, but I knew that I still saw his humanity. I still saw who he was, and I still was really, really angry. And I went through, I cannot say in any regard that I am fully over anything that happened and that I have fully forgiven him, and I go in and out. And so a big part of what I want to bring is the honest truth for me in this healing journey, because sometimes I feel like I am the queen of queens and that I have conquered this whole experience that happened to me, and that I have like really been there and done the healing work. And then I get this like intense anger that's just overwhelming and makes me like just turn into like a monster, because there's parts of me that are still so angry. And so a big piece that I want to bring is just that honoring each step and process for all parties involved. And I have something to share, but I don't know, Sadiq or Scott, if you guys have an idea. I want to make sure there's a held enough container at this point to go ahead and share. What do you guys think on that?
I think we're good. Maybe what we can do is just establish our container that, again, we'll talk about very tender things. So just want to ask that everybody thinks before they express themselves in the chat box.
If I could just jump in for a moment and ask perhaps if I could speak briefly before Kenzie does.
That's fine with me.
Hi, everyone. Scott, I so honor you. It is a pleasure to be here with you and your group on this Sunday. It is a pleasure for me to support Sadiq and Mackenzie in this Me3 movement. I'm Audrey Addison Williams, a part of the core Me3 team, and Reverend Audrey Tomini. I would just like to share just a few brief insights that perhaps could frame our conversation and our discussion. And I love to ask questions. First of all, let me just say that anyone who has ever presented an event forum knows that there's a backstory. So there's a backstory here, folks. We didn't just show up here smiling to present this without there being some difficulty. And, you know, there are buzzwords like collaboration and co-create that we all use, but doing it is not so easy. And we're here because of love. This event, this moment is because of love. And when we were in a meeting the other night, Mackenzie and Tazik was using language that was foreign to me as it relates to sexual trauma. And Mackenzie said, out of the box. And I said, what do you mean? As I sat praying this morning about my role in this, and because I believe that the divine shows up in all of us, in each of us, I said, what if we let sex out of the box? What if we just blew wide that whole box of sex and sexuality and norms and rules and religion and culture? What if what now results in trauma is only trauma because of our beliefs, because of our culture, because of our religion? What if we could truly be free to explore and express our sexual identity outside of any boxes that exist? And this is especially meaningful, I believe, for this audience, because this audience is higher consciousness. This audience is an audience that believes in doing no harm. This audience is spiritually aware and evolved. But does that mean we have any less sexual hangups than anyone else? Does that mean that we're thrilled and in bliss all of our lives and our sexual activity is above board, is moral, ethical, and pleasing? I don't think so. So I'm beginning to see that Me Three could bust wide open any paradigm that exists about who we are or are not as sexual beings. When I first participated with Sadiq in this forum, there was a doctor on, Dr. Z, I believe, who said something I've known for years, that our sexuality is tied to our creativity. Now, we have a crisis of leadership because our leaders lack creativity across the board, across the board. And so if our sexuality is tied to our creativity, what if we could dive deep, as Sadiq and this opportunity is giving us, to explore how creative other aspects of our lives could be and would be if we did this work? One final comment. Oprah Winfrey said that when she knew better, she did better. That's not my experience. And maybe it's yours, but it's not my experience. Okay, so I had a spiritual awakening in February of '86. I'm a recovering Pentecostal. And in the Pentecostal church, you keep going up to the front and repenting for your sins. And one Sunday, a woman tapped me on the shoulder. She said, don't you go back up there anymore. You repented enough. But what I found is to be sorry and feel guilty unless I move out of that energy of that trauma, I keep repeating the behavior. So I want us to be mindful as we share stories, as we honor each and every one of us, that the purpose of Me Three is to move beyond shame and guilt. It's to move beyond blaming. It's even to move beyond naming. When we start naming people as addicts, when we start naming people as having psychosis, when we start naming people, we put people in a box and we say, that's not us. That's not us. And I know that Sadiq's intention is to break through that and to say that all of that is us. I conclude by saying, in 2008, I was in Santa Barbara in Cottage Hospital because I was addicted to painkillers. And when I left there, I signed myself into a 28-day program. And day 2, the therapist came to me and she said, there's a group of professional men who've been sentenced to this group by the court. And I'd like to know if you would participate in this group on a daily basis. Wow. You want me to participate with all of my stuff and all of my molestation at 3 and violent kidnapping and rape at 15, and even assaults I did not know was rape. But that changed me because 5 days a week for almost 4 weeks, meeting with professional men who were sentenced to this group by the court, it shattered my myths and broke through a lot of my need to blame and shame. And finally, the therapist said one day in class, and this is the hardest truth I've ever had to accept. She said, everyone who has ever been a victim is also a victimizer. And that was really, really hard for me to swallow. And so this is a conversation that we invite you into. It's a sacred and a holy space. And we thank you so much for being here. God bless you.
Thank you so much, Audrey, for that share. Just what you were saying in the beginning, it's so true. Like just being raw and honest with how I'm feeling right now. I'm feeling super scared. And a part of me feels really open and like wanting to share with everyone. And a part of me is like, there's people. I don't want to share this. Like, this is my little bubble I've had for the last 2 years. So thank you guys for holding this space for me. And I'm really excited to share. So this is something I wrote a couple of days ago. And it's not super long, but it's very true to what we're talking about. So, to the person who raped me, if your consciousness was my consciousness, if your suffering was my suffering, if your conditioning was my conditioning, I would have behaved exactly as you did to me. This is not to condone or approve of what you did. It is merely to understand it, and this is love. If we want to talk about rape culture, we need to get serious about understanding it. I can't accept change if I'm insensitive to insensitivity, prejudice to prejudice, hating hate, violent against violence, or abusive to abusers. And there's this one quote that I want to add in here that I love, which is that if we could read the secret history of our enemies, we could find in them enough sorrow and suffering to disarm all of our hostility. Thank you. That's all for now.
Thank you, Kenzie. Thank you very much. I'd like to come in for a couple minutes just to anchor in a couple of really important things that we've heard today already from Sadiq and Kenzie and Audrey. As someone who's been working as a coach with people, thousands of people for a long, long time, I just want to say that our deep wounding doesn't necessarily ever fully heal. We have scars. If you have a big enough cut, it heals, but you have a scar. And sometimes with our deepest wounds, we want it to just go away because it's painful, it's uncomfortable. And so like, Audrey said, we have that epiphany, we go into forgiveness, we have this spiritual experience, and then a week later we realize I'm still really pissed off. I still hate that person or whatever it might be, right? So I just want to acknowledge that's okay. That is part of the human experience. And to truly manage our pain, we must accept and acknowledge and be present with the pain. And so this is really something so important for all of us, whatever our pain is, whatever our wounding is. It's not about healing it. It's not about fixing it. It's definitely not about getting rid of it. It's about learning to honor it, to manage it, to work with it. The best-selling poet in America for a long time, many, many years, has been Rumi, a 12th century gay Islamic mystic, is the best-selling poet in America. How cool is that? And I bring up Rumi because his poetry, his speaking has lasted all these centuries because of his understanding of what Kenzie referenced and what I'm anchoring in right now. Learning to accept and embrace the shadow side. Learning to understand that it is a mystical journey, and sometimes it's not about the answer or the journey, or getting to a particular place, or even a solution. It's about being present to the journey. And so I honor and acknowledge each person's journey of life, each person's journey of awakening. And that's where we leave the judgmental zone, as I said with Rumi, that beautiful quote, leaving the castle walls of right and wrong, good and bad, and meeting that field of compassion. And so that's our context for today. And that's what we're learning and practicing as a global community. Whether we're Black or white or privileged or challenged, or whatever it may be, we can all meet in the field of compassion and understanding. And so welcome, everybody.
Thank you so much, Scott. I really needed to hear that. That was beautiful. Thank you.
Would love to open it up to, does Kenzie, is there more you'd like to share this time?
I am processing right now.
Yeah.
I'm going to continue to process and be true to what's feeling in my heart. So, but thank you. Just observing in this moment. Thank you so much, Scott.
Maybe let's just all take a minute and hold space for Kenzie's processing, and hold space for our own, whatever trigger, whatever has come up for us. It might be our own wound of when we've been victimized. It may be our own wound where we have been a perpetrator and we've imposed our will, our desire onto another person in a way that wasn't welcome. So as group, as community, and I'm actually going to go to gallery view, just acknowledging all of us, and all of us represent all the people out in the world. Feeling whatever emotions are alive, honoring our body temples, honoring our emotions, and honoring our deep longing for understanding. Remembering that true forgiveness cannot come without mutual understanding. Understanding what the person who was hurt experienced, the consequences, and understanding what the person who did the hurting was longing for. What was driving that person at that time, that they made a choice that had hurtful consequences. And when we understand each other, then beautiful healing takes place. Let's just open it to anyone who wants to, feels truly called, motivated at this moment to express themselves and to share.
The thought that was coming into my mind, Scott, was one of the things we talked about in the Me3 Council was the setting of context and creating the sacred space. So as and when we do dive into space of sharing, which a number of us have intended to do today, and there's some people who will be joining us later on in the schedule as well to share some more as well, is in order to share our stories, in order to, like one of the contexts that we talked about in moving from Me2 to Me3 is like, when we call out, how are we calling in at the same time? and calling into healing is what that means. That we're not just calling out and saying, this person did this wrong to me and I want them locked up. It's this person, like did this. It really hurts. I want healing. And I trust that the universe has a way and a society that can hold a space for that person to heal too. And I might be a part of that if and when I ever get ready to be a part of that. I may or may not. But so part of this part here, we talked about is like creating a context of what do we mean? So if me 3 is encircling a trauma with love for all parties involved, we wanted to make sure that everyone understood what we meant by love. And I'm wondering if we can bring Kenzie on and Audrey on, because we were having some really sacred conversation. Can we bring them into the spotlighted space with me, please? And yeah, awesome. Thank you. We had some really potent conversations around, like what does it mean to encircle a trauma with love for all parties involved? Does that mean that we go straight to forgiveness? Does that mean that we don't feel our feelings all the way through and feel our hate and feel our anger and feel our rage and feel our betrayal and all that stuff? And no was the answer that we came to, but we wanted to really create a clear context, because oftentimes, like, there are many words out there like peace and love and others that people understand in different ways. And we wanted to be really clear with the world what we mean when we say to encircle a trauma with love for all parties involved. And I'm going to share a little bit for me of what that is. And I also want both Audrey and Kenzie to share a bit about what that is for them. At Earthwalk, which is the parent organization that is launching Me3, we talk about love as service to all. So service to all meaning that the actions that are taking place is in the service to the healing of all. And it doesn't mean that, like, there are things that we are asked to do that is for our improvement, that we might not like. If for me to try to think of a good example, but even just the basic things like, building muscles, whatever, like it takes work, it takes effort. It's not always easy. So sometimes, and I'm not saying all, sometimes going to jail, sending someone to jail might be the healthy, appropriate response. But can we check in our heart to ask and say, is that actually in service to them too? Or are we doing it because we're afraid? Because we can't handle our own emotional sphere? But that, in fact, we're sending them to a place where we're hoping that they get the healing that they need so they can return to their own wholeness. And so that's what we mean. We don't mean ignore, pretend it's not happening. That's not the love we're talking about. The love we're talking about is fierce. The love we're talking about is, I love you, and right now, because of what happened, I need to stay here. And I need you to go do your healing right now, if that's the stage. Or maybe I need a therapist here in the space for us to talk about this, or I need this, or I need that. So it's in no way, shape, or form, I want to be very clear, what we're talking about is not a space where we pretend that violations don't occur. Like, that is not what we're talking about. We're talking about how do we face these violations with deep love for ourselves and for everyone who's been involved with that.
Audrey, you're muted.
You're muted, Audrey.
Thank you, Sadiq. And thank you so much, Kenzie, for that beautiful, lovely. You're so courageous and you inspire me. So courageous. I have problems with words like love and peace. And anyone who knows me knows that I have a problem with it, because most of the time I don't know what the hell you're talking about. And that's just me. So yesterday, but every time I engage with anyone, I'm learning. I'm a lifelong learner. So yesterday I was engaged in a forum on justice, and a beautiful soul, Morgan, used the word toxic peace. And I went, whoa, toxic peace. That's just getting along to keep the peace. How many folks in a marriage for 40 years keeping the peace? How many folks in a marriage for 35 years and can't stand each other, have no idea who the other person is? Love in America is transactional. Is what can I get for you in return for? And sex is certainly in the arena of transactional. First of all, for women, we're told it's a prize. And we use that prize, we leverage it transactionally for our benefit. Every man starts off under a woman's heart. Every man starts off within, most men, under a woman's heart. And so do women have to accept responsibilities to some extent? So what do I mean by love? I go back to M. Scott Peck. And he said, love is the will to transcend one's limited self for the spiritual growth of oneself or another. Let me repeat that. Love is the will to transcend one's limited sense of self for the spiritual growth of oneself or another. Love happens when we don't feel like loving. Elizabeth Taylor said she kept getting married because she loves falling in love. Well, who doesn't like falling in love? The problem is, what the heck do we do when we fall out of love? And we still got to wake up and look at that person. And we don't even remember being in love. How do we behave? How do we act? How do we show up? So love is what we do. Now, as it relates to sexual violence or any kind of violence or trauma, at this stage of my life, it's do no harm. First of all, do no harm. The second is, what is the highest good of everyone concerned? And that's not an easy question. I was sitting here in prayer and meditation. I told somebody, I said, I got my glass of Merlot while I'm praying and meditating, trying to get through this morning. Asking what is for the highest good, the spiritual growth. See, Jesus said, you know, everybody wants the miracles. Nobody wants the teaching. Everybody wants to go to heaven. Nobody wants to die. We used to say in the Pentecostal church. So we want to awaken. We want all the money that comes. We want the perfect lover. And then when that lover is no longer perfect, we want them to go and get another. We just want, America want what we want, when we want, and how we want it. That's the culture that we live in. And there's nothing loving about that. So what I'm talking about is doing the work of critical analysis, total radical truth-telling, because truth-telling is a part of love. As far as I'm concerned, if there's no truth-telling, there is no love. It's impossible for me. Radical truth-telling, honesty with oneself first. So there are people who are a danger and a menace to society and need to be locked away. And I need to be clear about that. There are people who need to be locked away because they are a danger to society. Every child needs to be protected from all sense of everything that's not safe. Having said that, within the issue of sexual trauma violations, there are many gray areas. There are many, many gray areas. And so I don't know if any of my family is listening, but if everybody in my family, there were 11 of us and we had 16 kids and they had 9, and Lord knows before that. So if everybody in my family who had committed a sexual violation was locked up, I would say 70% of us would be in prison or would have done time. Think about that. I did some research for this. I'm a researcher and facts do matter. And the Megan law, where you have to identify as a sexual predator, and when you move into a neighborhood, that law has not in any way lessened the amount of violent sex crimes, because most of the time it's someone you know, someone in your family, someone that you see. But that law is not loving. It has hurt and done a great deal of harm to men. And so I'm a mother, I'm a grandmother, I'm a woman, I'm all of those things. But when you're the mother of a son and grandsons, you also try and see through their lens. And the world is constantly changing. It used to be, if she didn't say no, it was okay. Now she has to say yes. So I'm no longer saying to my grandsons, if she doesn't say no, it's okay. I'm telling them she has to say yes. I want you to hear her say yes 3 times, 3 times. Or else you put your clothes back on and get out of there. Let her say yes 3 times before you even take your clothes off. This is, and I'm a minister. And I served a singles group of bourgeoisie professional women, Black women and men. But some of these women were coming to me. I told somebody, I don't like to do one-on-one coaching. I don't have the patience for it. But if you're an executive on Wall Street and you show up at his house, you're in his bed with shorts and a halter top on, it's 11:30 at night, don't come to me telling me what he did to you. I'm sorry. I don't want to hear it. What were you doing in his bed at 11:30 at night after having 3 or 4 drinks? And I know there are people going to disagree with me. But to me, Me3 is about having the ability to be truthful and to be accountable. And so if we stop blaming and shaming and said, what is it about sexual trauma or violence that's related to other forms of violence, that's related to other crossing of boundaries? It's not just about one act or one thing. So love for me is radical truth-telling and honesty, do no harm, and what is for the highest good. And with the highest good is the spiritual growth. The spiritual growth means we are here to be the very best that we can. The very best that we can. And so what is best for us doesn't always feel good. When that therapist said to me that I had been a victimizer, that did not feel good, but that was extremely liberating. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Audrey. I'd like to open it up to a few other voices, and Ayman has requested to speak. So Ayman, I'm going to put the spotlight on you.
Really quickly, Scott, before we do that, if it's okay, Ayman, really quickly, just wanted to, there was just one more piece of context that we wanted to share before we dove in, because part of what we're going to be doing now is inviting all of the voices to come and to share. Some of us who have prepared and some of us who haven't, your voices are welcome here. And that's what this entire movement is about. It's creating a sacred fire. It's creating a sacred space. And part of what we just wanted to do before we did that is to set the firing appropriately so we don't get burned, right? So we are warmed by that fire, but we're not burned by that fire. And so one more time, if you're in Kenzie and Audrey back on really quickly, the last piece that I wanted to share was that and also if we can bring Damien in here as well. So 4 of the 6 global council members are here right now. 2 of them were not able to, they're here listening, but they're actually feeling under the weather, so they're not with us. But here are 4 of the 6 global council members for Me3. We're a growing and building movement. And so, you know, again, on that note, we're welcoming more to the table. But the context that we want to share is, one, what we just shared about what do we mean by love? What do we mean to bring loving eyes? You know, how do we do that? The second context is with those eyes of love, welcoming everything. And what we mean by that is that your tears are welcome. So as these stories are told, it's so common for a lot of us to clench up, to, you know, stay composed, to not let it out, to clamp down, to stay in our old patterns, to not feel what gets kicked up when someone else is sharing. Or if you're sharing, to try to share your story from a place of composure. That's the invitation here. If that's where you're at and how you feel ready, that's beautiful. And the invitation is to allow your anger to come up, to allow your rage to come up, to allow your sadness to come up, to allow your fear to come up, and to be real, to be human. I think part of why we're so wounded is we've been taught the lie that to survive in this world, we have to not be human. And we are human, so it's kind of hard to escape. So this space is what could happen if we dive into that, and that's what we want to make sure you know is welcome here in this space.
Great, thank you. Do you feel complete with that, Sadiq?
Yes, thank you.
Great, thank you. I'm in Europe.
Hey, hello there from Egypt. Uh, it's nighttime here, so sorry about the lights. So I would like to add a few more things to the mix here. I agree I believe almost all of us have experienced some kind of sexual shame at one part of our life. And I tried to think I didn't have any, but as I started digging deeper and deeper, yeah, maybe I didn't have real rape or so on, but I had been touched here and there. And anyway, to make a long story short, all of those things created for me shame. And shame is the most insidious emotions nobody want to talk about. We're okay to say I feel guilty, I feel angry, I feel happy, but I feel shame. It's like still taboo. Very few books about shame. Shame is the feeling of being flawed, a mistake. I should not deserve to live. I am not good enough. And the brain, as young age, secrete beta endorphin to help and deal with the shame, which is 40 times stronger than endorphin. And those excess chemicals released from the brain go over the nervous and the endocrine system and create tape loops and create lots of damage in our growing up. The problem with shame, we cannot process it. We can process our anger, our fear, our jealousy. But shame, we can't process it because shame is an abuse. It's somebody dumped their own shame on us when they couldn't process it themselves. It moves on from generation to generation. It never stops because you cannot process that shame because it's not ours. We need to give it back to the offender in meditation, in certain energy work, and our best to ask higher forces, God, Goddess, whatever you believe in to be higher force, to lift it off you. And of course, forgiveness and all the other stuff is necessary. So shame, whatever the shame person, when shame gets up to here, they have no other option but to dump that shame on the first person by, and usually it's their family member, their friend at school, etc., etc. So, and we don't deal with shame, and it passed on. We need to, and the abuse comes sometimes sexually, sometimes physically, sometimes, in my case with my father, mentally and emotionally, demand and expectation of perfection, and I failed, and more shame. So nobody want to deal with shame, but shame can be fixed. And we need to have a couple of generations of people releasing their shame and making sure we don't pass it on to the next generation. A conscious action. We do not shame our kids anymore in any way, shape, or form. It might take a few generations, but these days it's not, with this new world happening, with this new resonance and energy, we don't need necessarily to process it as in the past. Oh, I'm running out of battery. So we don't need to process it as in the past, taking a lot of therapy, and I mean, some might need to, but it's an age of consciousness we are entering. Sometimes for many things, maybe not for shame, it's about being aware of it, being conscious of it, and it can be quick forgiveness and observing its impact over time and slowly allowing it to pass by. Emotional literacy is a key for our next children education. We can't have a child, a parent, becoming parent without having an emotional literacy certificate or a parenting certificate. So all what I want to say is that from my own experience, I had every kind of shame you can imagine. And I dived into for years and years. And so I believe we need to cut the cycle of shame once and for all. And it's not necessarily just focus on the sexual or this or that. The shame person will shame others, as Audrey said, the victim is victimized or whatever, because we always pass it on, you know. So I would like us to, as a society, to start thinking, okay, how do we butt that shame out of the system, out of our culture, as this energy. Shame, the other side of shame is remorse. You know, when shame is dumped on us so much as young child, we get robbed from the ability to have remorse. And that's why we go repeating the same thing, stealing, doing all kinds of things, and we don't feel remorse anymore. So this is few of the, what I would like to share with you is that let's some of us focus on the shame and eradicating shame from our culture.
I'd love to just add for a quick moment, because what you're saying is so important. Most people that have any form of addiction, and addiction can be basically just it's to escape, right? So addiction can be drugs, alcohol, Facebook, social media. Underneath the addiction almost always is shame and the desire to escape the shame. And what happens is then the distraction of our addiction is usually what causes us to avoid the pain of the remorse. But what Iman said is so beautiful, because there is a distinction between remorse with an open heart seeking to understand and shame, which is making myself wrong. So if I have remorse, ideally, I'm self-reflecting. I'm using my emotional intelligence to self-reflect and understand, why did I do that? And how did it impact myself and others? Whereas shame perpetuates the fundamental lie that there's something inherently wrong with who I am. And so just a wonderful tool is to differentiate between who we are as a being and choices that we have made, right? I think Audrey referenced this about not creating an enemy image. So not just saying, I'm a drunk, I'm an addict, or he's a drunk, he's an addict. No, he's Joe, he's Scott, and he has made choices that perpetuated addiction or perpetuated alcoholism. But to always differentiate between the beauty of the being that we all are and the painful choices that we've made, so we don't fall into the pit of shame, the perception that there's something inherently wrong with me or with you or with someone else. Seeing the divinity in all, while painfully acknowledging consequences of choices that we've made. I just wanted to kind of riff on what I heard Iman saying and add those tools and apps that they're of value for you. Would anybody that we haven't heard from like to share? Damien, am I seeing?
Russell looks like he wants to share as well on here.
Hi, everyone. I just met Sadiq a few weeks ago through seeing his profile on Facebook, getting curious, and then finding out that we had a lot to talk about. And that my personal history has a lot of resonance with his and with the healing that both of us have gone through in different directions. So my story is one of a perpetrator. I 4.5 years ago bought cocaine for the first time, and I did it for 6 days in a row. And then I went to a party and was having it was a sexually open party, and I met a woman there and was having a really wonderful time with her until she fell asleep because she had too much of something else. And we had engaged, pretty intimately up to that point, but hadn't gone all the way. But I said, would you like me inside you? and she didn't respond. Yeah, it was a clear yes for sure. But in my addled state, I put on a condom, and for a few minutes, I penetrated her without her permission. And then she woke up, and people came in the room, and I ended up admitting to rape to the entire community of 600 people on Facebook. Fortunately, she was taken very good care of by the community, and later reported that she wasn't suffering any ongoing trauma from it. But I've really, at that point, surrendered to healing. I'd done a lot of transformational work up to that point, but that helped like this, but didn't really solve the issues here, which for me was a lot of toxic shame that had been running in my life ever since I was a child, for being the brainiac who could understand the universe, but not how to connect with people. And I felt really rejected for who I was, and just moved a little more into my head and kind of operated from there to too great an extent. So in the past 4.5 years, I've worked with over 24 different therapists and healers in a real effort to understand how I could do such harm to someone, and have unearthed a lot of these root causes and discovered pathways to coming back to my own wholeness and knowing my true sovereignty, and coming back into my body. What I've come to understand from this is that we're all traumatized. Like, every one of us has had terrible things done to us, and we've done terrible things to other people. And from these traumas, these unresolved experiences, when they're triggered or activated, they kick us out of our bodies, like up into our heads, in an attempt to solve it. And we're just not able to be present to the feelings that are occurring in our bodies. And so we disassociate, or we go into thought. And the thinking patterns are kind of like ruling the world. We're all just way too much in our heads, I believe, and with a significant disconnect from our bodies. So the other thing I've learned from this journey of awakening is what I believe the Metoo movement has been calling for, which is for men to really wake up and understand how wounded we've been, because we've kind of been shamed out of our bodies, forever, and taught not to feel, not to be vulnerable, not to be sensitive, don't be anything remotely feminine, and be a man. And what that means essentially is don't feel. And so we have been traumatized out of our bodies to such an extent that we don't understand feel the real pain and suffering we're causing through our actions. And that because I've, in my highly mental state, I would make minor boundary violations on occasion through my life, more than most people, probably because I was a little more clueless than most, all of which I did my best to clean up at the time. But I didn't understand that these mistakes weren't necessarily individual experiences for the women involved. That in many cases it was one more shovelful of shit on the mountain that she was already carrying, of all the little violations for men, and one more reason not to trust men, one more bar in the patriarchal cage of oppression and repression and suppression that's really controlled and dominated women and the feminine since forever. And to my great shame, looking back, I see that I've probably put quite a few bars up in women's experiences through my unconscious, clumsy, awkward, insensitive actions, and my inability to connect with my own body to intuitively and empathically feel the harm I was causing. So I as I said, I believe this is what the Metoo movement really is calling for, is for men to come back into our hearts, to regain our intuition and our empathy, which was kind of like, it's been cauterized out of all of us when we burned the witches, right? And we went to the purely intellectual mode, which has been dominating our world ever since. Because we don't trust our intuition, because we can't distinguish it from our wounded inner child. We can't tell what's our true inner voice and what's our, our wounds and our traumas, like speaking, and our fears. And until we come back into wholeness with our bodies, we can't trust that. But that's really the opportunity. And that's really not even the opportunity, it's the imperative, is for us to regain our wholeness and our embodiment. So this has been a very, very challenging 4.5 years. There's been several women who've been triggered by my past and have, I've, triggered their wounds in ways that they've made accusations against me that are, exaggerated at best and, pretty much untrue. But they've caused a lot of anger to arise for me in certain communities. I've, this has really just alerted me to just the wounds that we all carry, and to be especially sensitive with people, and to drop even deeper into my own intuition and my own sense of myself. So I want to share one of the most powerful healing activities and practices that I've come across, which has done the most, been the most impactful and healing to me, which is that for the last three years almost, I've been taking 3 breaths into my heart once an hour. Like, I've got a chime on my phone. And when it pauses, I just drop in and feel my chest expand and feel my presence there in my body. And through this, I have changed my home from here, where I've been living most of my life, to here. And now I experience a sense of embodied just groundedness and presence and sovereignty. I didn't know what that word meant until this past year, when I was, really, really tested by, these allegations and all the fear and terror that it was arising in me, that I was just, going to be, outcast from communities. But with this practice, was able to contact joy and wholeness in the face of these storms, and be able to tolerate being in my body and what was coming up in it, and not have it bleed out into my relationships with others. I was actually finding myself being extraordinarily kind with people while I was going through these terrifying experiences. So I think this is the call, is for all of us to heal ourselves. This practice is a wonderful way to kind of like bypass all the traumas that like kick us out and just come back home. These bodies are our homes, and we're all kind of homeless, just like stuck up here trying to search for the right path and the right formula that'll allow us to feel safe. And we can access that directly just, through this. So I want to invite all of us just to pause for a moment and to breathe into our center. And just for 3 breaths, I like to put my hand here on my sternum. And close your eyes. Just feel the sensation of expansion and contraction there, and put your awareness there in your body. The other great benefit of this practice is its direct access to joy. You know how little kids have joy all the time? That's who we were before we got traumatized, right? Is that level of joy and happiness. And it's just the pure joy of being embodied, of being in a body, of being, in physical reality. And there's so much joy waiting for us in our body for it to reclaim it. We just have to start honoring these temples that we exist within. And from honoring our own, we can thereby honor everybody else's. As we drop into our hearts and rediscover our empathy. And we're not telepathic, but we are telepathic. We can feel each other, but we have to be in our bodies and in our hearts in order to really access that. And that's what the calling is for all of us, so that we can awaken together to our truly divine nature, the spark of awakened consciousness that's within each of us. It is our true self. And that consciousness, according to the Vedas, most ancient spiritual texts in humanity, are Sat, Chit, Ananda. There's only three qualities, which is existence, consciousness, and bliss. That's our true nature. And we can access that bliss just by coming home to ourselves. So I'm incredibly grateful for being given the opportunity to heal, and that it didn't go the wrong way. You know, she could have pressed charges against me and sent me to jail possibly. And fortunately, I've, surrounded by a lot of angels who helped me when I fell, face planted into shame, and who helped me, arise and find my own wings. So I want to close with the statement that's really led me through this, which is by the Queen of Shame, Brene Brown, who has been researching shame like no other and unpacking its workings and kind of the way that it really runs so much of society in a way that no one else has really looked at. She's a clinical researcher, if you don't know her yet. And she says, if you own your story, you get to write the ending. And so I have sought to own all impacts of my story. And if you'd like to know more about my story, there's a Facebook group called Damien's Healing Journey, which I'm just putting the finishing touches on today. So it'll be up by the end of the day. Damien. And you can go there and see more information about what I've gone through, and join me in this healing journey. We've all got a long way to go to heal this place. But that's what we're here for. And we can do this together. Thank you.
Thank you, Damien. Thank you very much. Just take a minute to acknowledge, and as we keep Damien on the screen for a moment, just bless him. Maximum grace for Damien. Maximum grace for Damien and his journey. Maximum grace. I believe that Russell is going to express himself next. You're up, Russell.
All right. I'm just looking at you, Scott, there. I don't know if that's the intention. Not that I'm so much looking to be in the spotlight, but I will step forward, just step up. So, only a few things I like to share. I just want to move to share. Just one being is just thank you, Kenzie and Sadiq, for being tapped into the vision of what's looking to happen. This is a movement, a healing whose time has come. And I feel humbled, I feel trembling in my body of just of the necessity and the depth of what this is bringing. And I just more than anything else, want to take a moment and just welcome in for myself and for everyone, just being willing to be with the emotions that are being stirred as a first step. This is a long conversation, and it takes time to heal. I remember one of my primary teachers in the shamanic tradition says to learn well takes time. That goes with healing. To heal well takes time. And I think we're just so caught in this kind of fast food mentality, like give it to me yesterday and I want to get through it. And some of the other people who have spoken shared about that, like Kenzie talked about, like, you know, getting past it. And to really heal as a culture, we need to slow down, to be with ourselves, to be with each other, because that's what creates safety, more of still waters than rapidly moving currents and turbulence. Because that's what it feels, on a certain sense, to be violated, is it's turbulent. And how do we return to still waters? To tend to the waters takes time for the tides to change and the weathers, the emotional systems as weather, to the weather systems as emotions, to in the right cycles and timing. So coming back to the breath, as Damien talked about, coming back to the breath and honor each one of our own process. In my experience, similar to Scott, we met a long time ago. We both kind of similar path of working with people and around emotionality and partnering and healing and emotionally. And in my experience of working with many people over the years, everyone, including myself, everyone has been violated on some level, And that's not comparing. And I think one of the biggest detriments to this path is the comparing of pain. I know it's happened to me. And Sadiq, this is kind of what inspired me to share, was hearing you say, it's not my time. And how devastating that is, what that brought up for me. And just the impact of, I felt that before, and that's happened to me. Different context, but still feeling what that brings up for me. And the greatest thing I think each of us can do, and definitely what I continue to try to do, is what's coming up for me. The most potent question I can ask. What's coming up for me? Keep it over here. Like, what's coming up for me? What's coming up for me? And that brought up like how much that had rocked me. And the scar you talked about, Scott, like, yeah, some things just don't really heal, aren't even meant to heal. They scar, or they stabilize, and we do transform. But reminders of like, oh, this is what I've been through, and let me remember what it took to get through this and what happened to me. Not as to keep it in place, to be like, I'm a victim. There's a place for that, but there's a place of like, wow, it takes courage to heal. And this is what I've been through, and I remember, so that I can help others. Living testament of the depth of what it takes to heal. So there's two last pieces here. Is one is about processing emotion. I just alluded to that. Is this is a beginning process here, and just a couple of things in my experience of ask yourself what's coming up for me, and tend to that, like a garden. Tend to like these emotions, these thoughts, these feelings, sensations, how they're registering. What do I feel in my body? And just begin to tend, not a force. Like, oh, I'm just feeling freaked out, or I'm feeling emotional, I'm feeling tingling, I'm feeling disillusioned, I'm confused, or whatever it is. I think the most thing that we need is just baby stepping into feeling more and more safe, to have space to heal. And this is creating that space, starting this process in motion of a safe space. And the last piece here is, why don't people share? Why don't we share? Violators or violated, why don't we share? It's because we're terrified. We're terrified we're going to be judged. We're terrified we're going to be dismissed. We're not going to be believed, or we won't be accepted and embraced if we've been a violator. And again, we all have in some way. So terrified of like, oh my God, we're going to be cast off. I know one part of the Metoo movement was asking for consent and accountability. And I hear that and I really feel that the Me3 is giving space for all, not even sides, giving space for the wholeness of what this is, and to be able to be together, make space to be together. And as Audrey said, like, sometimes we just need to stabilize. I need a boundary. I can't be with you right now. But what we're doing is creating a space so that we can eventually learn how to be together which is really the depth of the spiritual truth of which I feel we're all a part of and engendering, is remembering that we are all together. We don't necessarily have to be right in each other's space. It takes time to learn how to be and be human about it. I need some space here. Now I'm ready to take a baby step to even address you or what happened between us. And then eventually, maybe we can sit together. Maybe we're not meant to sit together again, but at least maybe energetically we can, or I can sit with you inside of me after this violation and eventually see that, wow, for someone to violate, they've been violated. Someone to abuse, they've been abused. And we all have these cycles within us. And we are one family, and we're all taking turns going through it. So thank you so much, Kenzie. Thank you, Scott, and thank you, Sadiq, and thank you everyone here showing up, because there are people facilitating, but we're all showing up here because we care. And thank you for starting this incredible movement. And I'm honored to be a part of it.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Russell. Thank you. Is there anyone else, perhaps, that we have not heard from that wishes to express themselves?
This would be a wonderful time for Mila's poem. Are you ready for that, Mila?
I wasn't expecting to speak, but I can share it.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for asking.
I'm going to put the spotlight on you so we'll at least see your photograph, Mila.
Okay, that sounds great. I apologize. I can't be with everyone on video today. I woke up feeling really ill, and so I'm actually joining you from my bed and not in a space I'd like to broadcast around. How do we create a world where women feel safe to freely live in their full radiance? Yes, of course, the answers to personal empowerment always lie within. And there are ways of being, systems in place, old dynamics still playing out today through everyone. These invisible structures, made real through unconscious actions, allow imbalance to be perpetuated in our world on every level. The central imbalance we are creating and repeating is the rape of the feminine. This may sound harsh, and you may feel you have no part in it, but I believe we are all consciously and unconsciously contributing to a reality founded upon rape. And this fact is so ugly that it can feel unbearable to face. Though what is also true is that within our bodies, a light brighter than any darkness, a love more true than any harm, a connection more real than any illusion exists. When we remember this and remind one another, we activate our collective and personal ability to transmute old ways and birth new worlds. We swirl in an upward spiral of surrender as we mirror one another in our strengths, allowing all that is untrue to effortlessly fall away and disappear into the winds of change. In every moment, we are participating in this shift, whether we know it or not. In every moment, we can choose to embody harmony, sovereignty, kindness, responsibility, oneness, gentleness, power, and love. In every moment, we are building a reality in which we experience balance within and outside of ourselves. I'm sorry, there's more. I had a technical difficulty. Taking a breath. I am doing this by taking full responsibility for every experience I have ever found myself in. I am doing this by noticing where the relationship between masculine and feminine energies within myself has been out of balance, and how this is reflected in my personal relationships and in the greater world. I am doing this by acknowledging the interconnectedness and multidimensionality of this transition time we are all in together. I do this by honoring the true balance that I am, that we are, that nature is, and choosing to embody this honest balance to the best of my ability in each moment. Knowing that this will naturally ripple out to all of life, received by all, as an echo of their own innate wholeness, a silent reminder of what we all already know. We are whole. We are one. We are the one remembering we are whole. Each other, and ultimately through ourselves.
Thank you so much, Mila. And likewise, let's just all take a moment, maximum grace for Mila, both in the short run with her, whatever's happening for her physically, and like for everyone, maximum grace for her journey of life. Is there anyone else, especially anyone we haven't heard from, who wishes to express themselves? All right, well, it looks like we're winding down. Sadiq, do you want to, I think you had something you wanted to conclude with?
Yeah. I wanted to, I mentioned in chat with Scott that I wanted to wait to go last. So after I share, then we can go into the closing and sort of transition into how this relates to the whole person convergence, the larger movement, and how to get involved in this movement and the growth of it, so we can provide spaces and processes of healing. And I say processes because the time for us sharing our stories, it's one way, it's one process, one way in which we are able to move through this journey of healing and applying love to all the parties involved in our traumas. But it's only one. There are so many different ways in which we, as a species, can shift the spaces of trauma and pain towards a space of wholeness. Russell talked a little bit about that. Scott, Iman, Damien, Audrey, Mackenzie, all the different ways, from dance to yoga to going on hikes with friends, learning to hug again after violations of sorts, learning to get close after the space of most deepest intimacy has been violated. And so just wanting to set that as a context, that before I share the intention then as we close, and I'm hoping also, just as far as just on a high level, just to kind of communicate with context, is one of the members who has been with the Me3 team for a while is planning on joining us in 23 minutes. And my hope was to be able to include her into the circle sharing part. And if not, we'll figure her place perfectly in. But yeah, so I'm gonna take a deep breath for a moment and just really anchor in. So I'm noticing myself pretty scared. I'm noticing myself, really scared. Last night I went to bed knowing that I would be sharing my story in a deeper way, I think, than I ever have before, in a video audience realm, with the amount of people that are viewing, with my parents here in the room. With all of you to see, with the world to see. I've shared my story before. My story of sexual trauma and healing. That's only a small fraction of my story. Sometimes I think in my own journey, I forget. I think we tend to forget that sometimes we become our wounds, as opposed to remembering our wholeness. So it's something that I'm very consciously working in my own languaging. Is when I say my story, not to forget that my story, our story, is much vast and much bigger than any of our journeys of trauma and healing, but it's an infinite unfolding. And so today, I'm going to be sharing with you parts of my journey of sexual assault, rape, healing, and what that has done to me and to my psyche, and what I needed to do to work through that, and how that made me the man that I am today. I started this series. I'm smirking because the Whole Person series, a launch series, which this show is a part of a 12-day plus one event that is the culmination of a 3-month series of events with a whole person activation, whole person unification, and now this is a 12-day plus one convergence, whole person convergence. And I'm laughing because spirit oftentimes has its way. I started this journey towards creating what became this whole person and what we're doing today by simply saying to the world, or to myself, that I wanted to share with the world about my journey through bipolar depression. And that I had actually been on stages where I had talked about my sexual trauma and abuse and all that stuff, but rarely did I feel it would be okay to talk about my journey through the psychosis that was created as a result of what happened in my life. That as a global leader, as someone who is leading a movement to help create horrible context of healing that I had to hide. I had to hide this whole part of myself. Then I had to pretend that I wasn't wounded, or else you wouldn't follow. And I had to put this entire part of me aside. And I said no, that I couldn't do that anymore, that I wouldn't do that anymore. That's not the way that I want to heal myself or with the world. And so about 100, I think it's about, yeah, exactly, I'm laughing, 111 days ago was when this vision came to me to put together the whole person convergence, the whole person initially summit. And initially the vision was for 10/10/2020, which we did have an event. That was a whole person activation. And that was on World Mental Health Day. So my intention was to get in front of the world with other people who are leaders in the world, who have struggled with depression. I've heard that talked about already today on the stage, who have struggled with all the different ways in which our mind gets scrambled, our hearts get scrambled when we have pain stuck inside ourselves. And as a way for me to say no to that, meaning like I no longer want to carry that, and the only way that I can no longer carry it is to admit it, is to tell my story, is to tell that part of my story. The ways in which I had actually been victimizing myself by staying muted, by staying quiet. See, because one of the things that happened to me when I was raped by my female babysitter at the ages of 2 and 3 was she had told both me and my older brother that if we were to tell anyone, that she would kill us. And so when the Metoo movement came and I was again told that I could not speak, I was just, Russell, as you were talking and like sharing the impact of that, that actually just hit me for the first time of why that was so impactful for me. That for basically 20 years of my life, I just shut up. I did not talk about that. I held it inside and I turned that into bipolar. I turned that into 8 years of suicidal depression. And so like when I say like we need a world where we can create safe spaces for that healing, like I mean it, because I know what it's like to suffer alone. I know what it's like to suffer in silence. And I personally don't want that for anyone. And I'm taking a stand today with you for a different world. For a different world where we can stand out in safe spaces and talk about this. And even sometimes, because of our own humanity and fumbleness, in spaces that aren't so safe, and learn from that process. But that because of where we've come as a culture, because we've learned to share more and more and more and more, when people do share in ways that might not have been the most appropriate or might not have been the safest in the world, that we have a culture that brings our arm around them too and says, hey, you know, I'm wondering if we can help you with that. And so, and I know I'm going all over, and I'm just going to trust the weaving here. As I had mentioned earlier on in this show, when I went back after years of working with all of this, I and journaling about all this, I started to count and notice that I had had sexual exchanges and interactions with 18 people before I even hit puberty. And I'm actually going to let that land for me for a moment there, as I'm sharing it here with you for a moment. And some I knew about, some I didn't. Some I learned and realized later. Some I actually found out, not from my own memory, but from others telling me what had happened when we were younger. Some were innocent, playful, interactive things that young kids do with each other. Some were not. Some were violating. Some were without consent and with force. I want to say, like, at this point, I've had the luxury of experiencing it all. And I say luxury because at this point, I've come to a place where I'm grateful. I'm grateful that I've experienced all of this, because this is what helps me. This is what helps me to lead a movement on deep, powerful healing. Because had I not gone on to that journey, I would be dead. Had I not taken off that mask, I would be dead. Had I not started trusting first a therapist, had I not first, after that, by the grace of like my father realizing that I needed help, suggesting that I intern at a drug rehab center, and had a similar story at a different angle than what Audrey was talking about, where I saw my story all over the place, and I'm like, fuck. And I could no longer keep down anymore. Because as I was looking, I just like story after story after story of like incest and rape, and is what created, as Scott had said, that disease, that addiction, because we had those violations and we had those pains that we couldn't process, and we didn't have the safe space to hold. And so when I was young, yes, like I was raped. I was the victim. I was in the seat of the victim. But when after those years of 18 experiences and 15 years, I was a late bloomer. When I hit puberty and had all that unprocessed rage, had all that unprocessed hurt, had all that like unprocessed love, like my little boy needed to be held, and he couldn't go to his mom and dad and say that, help me. He had to grow up really fast, really quick. And when I, hit puberty, with all of that, I started going into my sister's room, and I started acting out what had happened to me. it was never, for clarification, it was never like genital like rape. But with my fingers, and for about 2 years, had a ritual in my life that late at night I would go into her room and violate my own sister. And there was a time when my mother had actually come into the room and found me there. And quickly she ran back out to grab my father. And by the time they came back in, I had removed myself from the situation. And my dad asked me what I was doing, and I said nothing. And what I want to say this with deep love and reverence, like for both of my parents. Deep love and reverence for the system that we live in and the imperfections of our system. But what happened at this point, which is something that's so common, I think, for so many of us, is that after that, basically, my dad said to me, if we ever catch you in there again, we'll call the cops. And it was never discussed again. See, because in our culture, had they said anything to anyone, our family would have been ripped apart. I would more than likely have been sent to juvie. I wouldn't be on the path I am today, I imagine, that's for sure. And because we didn't have those spaces, it makes sense to me that my parents wouldn't know what to do. And so at that point, not tending to the trauma, which was my broken heart and soul from all those years of abuse, I started going into my brother's room and acting out with him, and just shifting my pain, my trauma, to my brother. And that went on for about a year. And during that time, and this feels scary for me to say, but and during that time also attempted to do the same thing with another brother. He would wake up quickly and would not engage in the same way. And so I pulled back. My point in saying is I was so sick. I was so broken. And I don't think I've actually ever shared this with my mom before. But like, I was so sick that I was actually fantasizing about doing that with her. That I was so sick, I was so broken that it was like a fire that had been burning inside me that just needed like those parents wrapped around. And, had I not been a scary boy of knowing the consequences of what would happen if I were to try that, that sick part of me definitely would have and wanted to. And I paint this picture because I think it's really important. Because right now, like, I'm one of many voices, like, leading a movement towards wholeness. And had I been locked away, had I been shut out, had I been in my lineage, part of, in the Judeo-Hebrew lineage, like, it's actually prescribed in the Hebrew Bible to stone someone like me. I should be dead, according to my lineage. And I'm really grateful that I'm not. Thank you to the rabbis who changed that a while back, and we're in a different time. I applied at this whole time. I was also a golden child, A+ student. student council, running my own businesses, doing different things, being successful in other realms. And then this was the way that I would act out. This was like my addiction, like throughout that process. And that kept me from my wholeness. I would be Superman out there and then totally break down and fall apart at night. And then I went away to school. And the reason I gave myself really two choices: Columbia University or the Israeli army. And the reason I chose those places, my parents, my dad said no to the Israeli army. But the reason I went to New York is because I knew that I, on my own devices, could not stop what was happening between my sister and my brother. That I needed actually out. I needed to get as far away as I possibly could so I wouldn't do that. I sort of, on some level, created my own prison. I removed myself because I knew that I couldn't alone. And there was not a system. There was not a system in place that would lovingly encircle me, who so badly, from the time of being 2 and 3 years old, needed a parent to hold me and let me cry and shiver and move through all the things that I had to hold instead for decades. And that was what started my journey. That was what started my journey of healing. When I went to New York for 3 weeks straight, just cried. My friends who were there had no clue what was going on with me. I wasn't ready to talk about it. And for about 2 years, that's what I did. I went to yoga classes. I, started going to meditation. I didn't tell anyone. I figured I will go to the grave with this. But as mentioned, eventually, I did speak. My dad did introduce me to this place. I ended up opening my mouth there and sharing. And then when I was 19 years old, I came back to my family and I shared with them what had happened. And I remember it was a meeting of about 20 of us because it was my immediate family. I had cousins there, I had uncles and aunts there. And it was a big step. My sense, and I'm noting time because I know, has Veronica by chance joined us? Do we know? No. We got another voice in the room.
Yeah, that's why I'm muted. My dogs are barking away. Veronica's not here yet.
What's that? Okay, great. Thank you. And yeah, so with that, I want to paint the larger picture here. So I've talked about a lot of my journey through being a victim. And then I talked this next chapter of being in the role of perpetrator. And then starting at around this age, moving from 19, then moving into the common third archetype of the hero. And so from that point forward, I really started doing my work. I started going to 12-step groups, Sex Addicts Anonymous, and every S group in the book: Sex Addicts Anonymous, Sexaholics, like Sex Love Addicts Anonymous. There's so many out there. And just started doing my work regularly. One person who I want to really quickly bring on is Margie. And during that time in the process of going through the 12-step community, I had learned for myself that space also felt to me like an old paradigm, meaning we're coming into a space where it's, hi, my name is Sadiq and I'm a sex addict, versus hi, my name is Sadiq, I'm a sexual being, and I've got good things going on and I got really crappy things going on, and can we embrace all of it? And so, with time, I ended up creating another group called Integrative Sexuality and the Conscious Relationship Fellowship. And that was 13 years ago. And Margie was there back in the days. And she has her own life coaching business. And we ended up creating a safe space for people to share their stories, to heal, to talk about the forbidden. And dedicated that period to really just purging and becoming a champion for the healing of this. And I'm curious, like, Margie, while you're here, if there's anything that you want to kind of intersperse into the space at all.
Whew. Well, brother, my heart is deeply with you today. I'm very proud of the work that you've done and the path that you've taken. And yeah, whew. 13 years ago feels like a lifetime ago. Considering everything that has occurred and the transformations that have happened and the work that is that you've gone through. And I really want to honor your mom and your dad for being here today. That feels really powerful, and I know that it's very hard for them too. So I really want to honor them and respect them immensely. And this moment's been coming for a long time. And there's been a lot of ups and downs. But one thing I have to say is that you have maintained an incredible resilience and an incredible vision. You just keep walking forward. And there's been a lot of knocks that have happened and that are still happening. There's a lot of ways in which your journey and your experience still shows up in big ways. And there's still a lot of bridges that are burning and that need to be healed and will continue. But your process has been incredible, and I really respect your courage and your resiliency and your strength, and just continuing to come forward and continuing to work it. You're working it, and you're a model, and your vision for the world is incredible. And I bless you on that journey, and I'm honored to walk alongside you with it, on it. Deep breath.
Once again, let's just all hold space, maximum grace for Margie, and maximum grace for Brother Sadiq. Maximum grace for Brother Sadiq. Maximum grace.
And if I may, thank you, Margie. And the next chapter that I want to share is sort of, similar and along the lines of what Damien had shared, which, is basically like, how do people respond when we are, when we're ready for healing, when we go out and say we're ready and others aren't, because that happens. That's the case. You might want to make amends and the other might not be ready. You might want to heal and the other's just like, no, not with you. I'm not gonna do that. No, never. And that happens. And that's true. And what I experienced to be true is that we're all on our own journey. We're all on our own path, and that we all open in our own divine time. And someone else's divine time might not be the same as our divine time. And so what happened at this point in being encircled with, all the different things that, 12-step yoga, meditation, you name it, Kundalini yoga training, holistic body therapy school, going to, training with shamans for like 15 years, going through all of the steps it took for me to purge those demons, if you will, those hurt parts of me. When I got to the point where I realized that staying quiet was actually causing more harm than doing good. And what I mean by staying quiet is, and this is part of where I broke with the 12-step community, and anonymity as the concept. I think anonymity and having that safe space, cocoons to be held is essential and important. But if we stay in there, we actually die. If we don't break out of the box, we actually will die in there, because in that safe box, in that cocoon, we start to grow just like we do in our mother's womb. Just like what Audrey was talking about before, like right below our mother's heart. If we grow too much while still in, we will kill both our mother and we will die. And so if we stay in that place of anonymity, if we don't start doing this type of stuff, sharing with the world our deepest darkness, we will actually be victim to that darkness, is my story. First, however, though, yes, we need to have that safe space. We need to have that place where we go, where we have people wrapping their arms around us, and that they're able to deeply see our humanity. I also believe, though, that there comes a point where we can't stay in safety anymore. That we have pulled together enough from that mother's womb, if you will, to be birthed into the world with all the elements, with all the dangers that this world has to offer, with all the arrows and what have you that will come our way. And that we're actually built as strong enough to withstand all of that. And that's what we spent those 9 months in the womb doing, is getting to a place where we would be strong enough to deal with the next level and the next level and the next level. And so at that point, after doing work with the sexual integration circles and doing all that healing work with the fellowship, the Integrative Sexuality and Conscious Relationship Fellowship, I got to the point where my story was known by probably about 1,000 people at that point in different inner circles. And as Margie had shared, sometimes I can piss people off. and that I can be bold, I can be brave, and sometimes my direction of where I'm going with my own sense of boldness and braveness is contrary to others, and we might hit, and I'm through that may create enemies. And we had to sort of look. We actually, as the team, looked at each other, and we actually asked the question of, is it time for me to start sharing publicly? Is it time for me to start breaking out of that box, of the safe containers? And we got to the place of yes. And it was actually like on a coaching session with Margie. So Margie actually coached me for about 3 years. I would not be here on this stage without her. And like major props like to Margie, if you ever need like an amazing person to do that kind of work with, like she rocks. I highly, highly, highly recommend. You know, if she can hold space and wrap her arms around someone who has my history, you know, like she's a rock star. And in that conversation, we got clear that the way to move forward with this was to write a book, that I would start working to write about my journey through sexual abuse and trauma, and the psychosis that it created inside me. Because what I experienced, and this is something that I think is really important for all of you who have experienced mental health challenges, what I noticed is the more stages I got on and the more safe places I got in, and I talked about this, my patterns of bipolar went down and down and down and down, to the point where I'm no longer on medication anymore. Do I still get into spaces where I get triggered like just any other human being, and sometimes run with energy like where's probably trauma informed? Fuck yes. Like I do. I still do. I probably will to the day that I die. But I also believe that every single time that I step out on the stage, and every single time that we as humans find the right places to step out, to be real, to be wise, and to share what society has been shaming us for God knows how long, we'll heal. I actually believe we talked about this, Russell, you talked about this, and a few of like we're really anchoring in this concept. For me, when I look back at my life, the sexual trauma that occurred, drop in the bucket. The trauma that occurred from the shame that I had to carry because of the belief systems and the structures and way that this society is formed, that kept me sick. That actually kept me going back into my sister's room and into my brother's room and into all the pain for so many years that did not need to happen had we had a culture that realized why hurt people and what to do with people who are hurting, and then sharing that hurt to others. I wouldn't have had to go through the last 30 years that I've had to go through if we had the culture that Me3 is talking about creating. So we can nip those things in the bud so people don't have to suffer for years and decades and possibly even their entire life. How many people of us have gone to our graves with these stories? I know I was prepared to. I was ready to. And so at that point, we decided that that was what was going to happen. Just seeing the note from my father. Love you, Dad. I just feel like, what we need to heal together is what's just like kind of coming through my sphere. And as I said, all at our different times. And what happened at that point was conjunct with my sort of moving into the space where I needed to come out of my box. My sister was moving back to Tucson where I was living. Now, over the course of those 11 years, as I said, from when I was 19 to about when I was 30, I spent time rebuilding my relationship with my family, with my brothers, with my sister, with my parents, to the degree that we could. And to the extent, in fact, that my sister returned to a place with me where when she was having relationship issues, she would call me and ask me for my advice and my support. I had returned to that space of being her favorite brother at that time, that she trusted with this type of stuff. Because of the depth of the wounds and everything that we, went through. We talk about trauma bonds and all of these things, like, all I want to say is it was amazing. We moved through so much. And when she returned to Tucson, she said to me she wanted to hang out with me more. She wanted to go hiking with me twice a week, and she wanted to go to lunch with me once a week. And I said to her that while I love her and that I want to do that, at that point, even though it had been out in the open, if you will, that I did those things, she and I had actually never talked about what had happened. When I came back to my family, I was 19. She's 6.5 years younger than I. So she was 13, 14. And so when I came back, it wasn't the time to talk about those things. Or at least, shall I say, the society and the cultural container that I was in didn't know how to encircle that and to create the right healing that would have actually been perfect for her age, my age, the family, all that stuff. Which again kind of goes future forward, like what can we create as a Me3 movement and a global society that encircles it all with love. And so I said to her, I would love to do that with you, Anna, but I'm not ready for that. And what I mean by that is that every single time I would hang out with her, all my shame would come up, all the intensity of stuff that had happened between us would come up, and it would scare the shit out of me, just to be totally honest. Like, I had to face what I had done every single time, but we couldn't talk about it, which goes back to what I had shared before about that same primary wound of like, if you say anything, you will die. And so I said to her, I would be more than willing to, I would love to do that. Would you be willing to go to therapy with me? So we can create the safe space for us to have those conversations. And so I can hang out with you on the level of regularity that you're wanting to. And if not, that's okay, but I need to know that I won't be able to hang out with you on that level of regularity because it would be too much for me and I need to take care of myself. And I'm gonna, after we hang out and spend time, I'll go to my friends, my community, I'll do the process that I need so I can't stay in a relationship here. But if you're not able to do that, then I have to also tend to myself and not deepen that connection in quite that way. And so I used to hold this as a mistake, and this is how I used to write it. But at that moment, I also, and so she said yes to that. And we were about to journey on that journey. And then I also, after that, with the next breath, said to her, and by the way, like, I want you to know that this is where we're at in this process. And I'm gearing up to write a book about my journey through sexual abuse, which, as you all know, in my sharing, my story is also intertwined with her story. There's no way that I can tell my story in the position that I was in as a founder of this Integrative Sexuality and Conscious Relationship Fellowship without sharing hers. There wasn't a way where I could actually stand up on stage, help support people through their sexual trauma and healing, and not actually share the intimate details, not the details of what happened, but just my brother, my sister, that like to keep it in the vague terms. And it also went against everything that I believed in too. And so I shared that with her, and something happened that I did not expect and that changed the rest of my life, which was she got really angry. She got really upset. And she went from a place of wanting to deepen our relationship to pretty much blowing it up. And stopped wanting to hang out with me, got really angry with me, and 9 months later was diagnosed with cancer. And then 22 months later died. And there's a lot of, details of all of that I'm kind of looking into my heart right now of what feels relevant to be sharing here now. But I learned a really powerful lesson in that whole entire process. And I trust the universe and how it unflows. And I also wished that I had waited. I had wished that I had first gone to therapy with her, that I had created that safe space with her. And then I shared with her, and hey, by the way, I think this is really important for me to do. I think what I'm going to do for now is start to close this up. One, I see Veronica's here. And I know her time is limited. And actually, can I bring you in really quickly?
I'll unmute myself. Hi.
Hi. Hi.
Sorry for the wet hair. It's raining here.
So I actually kind of want to pass the baton at this moment. I'm in the middle of the share and it's perfect. I want to pass the baton over to you to share a bit about what you were planning on sharing with the community today. And just so those who are watching, Veronica has been a part of the Me3 Global Council and the process of leading up. We're going through a transition right now where she's got some clarity that it's time for her to be focusing on some other projects, and and where we are today. I want everyone to know that she's been a part of that and the work that she's been doing.
Thank you.
And yes, I want to set that stage and just really deep love on what you're about to hear from this woman who's potent and powerful. She's a true warrioress. And so just to give you a little bit of context, Veronica, is like we've been in a sharing circle.
Yeah.
And then I kind of was sharing my story as the last to kind of also paint context of like how it applies to different aspects of Me3 and how we can create a different future. And so I'm wondering if you can share your piece into the space.
I'd love to do that, Sadiq, and thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. And I want to make sure I don't abuse the time limits here. So how long should this be, like 5 minutes or something?
That would be great.
Okay, great, because I'm long-winded. So looks like my camera's having problems. There it is. So I'm an incest survivor, a rape survivor, and a domestic violence survivor. And I come from a home. We're actually having the memorial from my cousin this afternoon. She comes from my father's side of the family. I have incest on both sides of the family. My mother was molested by her grandfather. My dad's, and all of his siblings were either having sex with each other or sexually assaulting each other. And the way it played out in both of my families of origin is that the males perpetrated sexual abuse. In my mom and dad's home, there was kind of mutual combat as far as the domestic violence goes, but my father always won because he was bigger and stronger. that's kind of my background. And I'm really wanting to shift the paradigm that we have around perpetrators and victims. Even if we change that term to perpetrators and survivors, I feel like it does not allow us to see the human beings involved in this. And when I have related some of the horrible sexual abuse that went on in both sides of my family of origin, a lot of people have like responded like, oh, those people should be in prison, or if I ever met somebody like that, I'd kill them. And I'm like, you're talking about my dad and my grandfather and my uncles, and I love those people. So I have really, really strong, bright lines about sexual perpetrations. And frankly, around anger, I'm an anger management coach. So I teach the couples that I work with that if you slam a door or throw something, that's violence. So I've got pristine boundaries around this. And I think I'm actually really thrilled about the Metoo movement, but I feel like it stopped short. And here's one thing I have a problem with: the cancel culture that comes with that. What happens to our world if we just start sorting people out as these are the people who've perpetrated, so they're bad. These are the people who've been victimized, so they're good. I think that that's a polarized and incredibly toxic view. So for instance, with my dad, he never really admitted what he did, and he certainly never made amends. I think he was mentally ill and therefore not a safe person to be around. So I put a lot of distance between him and I. But I still forgave him. And I forgave him because I also see him as a quote unquote victim. He grew up in a household where there was all this sexual assault going on. And in his worldview, he was not as bad as what he saw as a child. And he's right about that. He is right about that because he was never violent or brutal. So he thinks that he improved things and that he was a good dad. And in his world, he did the best he could. But, you know, he was born in 1939. He doesn't have access to therapy. There's a lot of terminology and concepts he never got exposed to. And while we're working to shift the power dynamics of a very toxic patriarchal society, I think it's crucial that we also look at the ways in which we can see each other as sick people, dysfunctional people, people who have been exposed to toxic elements and are doing the best we can. And of course, there's also the addictive elements. So when there's substance abuse, I myself have perpetrated domestic violence when I was high that could have put me in prison. So am I a victim or a perpetrator? Well, technically, I'm both. I have been beaten bloody and I have stabbed my fiance. Okay, those are really horrible prosecutable crimes. I don't think that my fiance was a bad human being. I don't think I was either. In fact, we both got clean and sober in a 12-step program, and we ended up getting married, and we lived a life that did not have violence in it. It took a long time for us to learn to relate that way, but I think it's so important that we champion people's recovery journeys, and we make room for the fact that we're not. I'd like to see us get rid of the labels perpetrator and victim and just say, here is perpetration and victimization. Wouldn't that be something? We could just focus on the behavior instead of trying to label people and demonize them. So it's really difficult and scary to admit perpetrations. I could get lots and lots of love if I say I'm a survivor, but it's very confusing for people when they hear that I also see myself as a perpetrator. In recovery, thank God, but nevertheless, somebody who needs forgiveness and redemption. So I don't know. I think that's about what I have to say about this at this point. And I'm just really glad for the opportunity, and I'm open to any questions, of course. Thanks, Sadiq. And thank you, everybody else, for this platform.
Well, thank you so much for sharing, Veronica. You bring so much clarity to a very difficult topics. So thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I would totally agree. I'm always mesmerized by your clarity. Like, I named it, and the depth of like heart and wisdom, and just it, like what feels to me like just purity. It's just like, yes, like this is who I am. I have this, I got my darkness, I have my light, I have my everything in between. I got the places where it mixes and melds, and like, and yeah, I'm human. And you know, and I also hear you say that, like, and so are you, like, so like referring to like your fiance at the time, or your family members and all of the journeys that they've been on. You look like you're about to say something.
Oh, the only thing I just always want to make sure, because I think we're all survivors. I really do. I think we're all suffering from levels of trauma. And I certainly know that everybody in my family who perpetrated sexual violence against children was also sexually abused as a child. So I just have, it's really important not just to feel the compassion, but to also have really bright boundaries around what's acceptable behavior. And people need to get help. You know, I wasn't a safe person when it came to domestic violence. So you don't want to just forgive me and give me a second chance. You want to make sure that I'm capable of making an amends, and I'm going to get help to change. So I just want to make sure our love and compassion is also married to holding people accountable. I want to be held accountable, and I have to hold the other people that have perpetrated against me accountable as well. But I get to forgive people, and even if they don't change, because that's for me.
I think a lot of the mystics call it fierce compassion. You know, and like, can we have that holy fire that, like, in the Earthwalk cosmology, on 1010, when we launched this series, we launched the eternal flame of peace. It wasn't the waters, it wasn't the earth, it was the eternal flames of peace. And that to have peace, that must be guarded by a sacred fire.
Oh, that's beautiful. Love that.
Where we hold each other accountable. And we, you know, the typical term, we, you know, to put your feet to the fire, to put someone's feet to the fire, and not to burn them, but to enliven, to wake them up, and to invite them into their true essence. Yeah.
And we need a way in which we can invite people who have created gross harm, particularly, probably any harm, but particularly gross harm. And I'm talking about some major harm here today, to welcome them back into the circle of humanity. Right now, I don't see that in the Metoo movement. It's like, you're gone, you're canceled. That's it. We don't want to hear from you ever again. And I'm like, wow, that's a horrible world. I want people to be able to come to have made that journey of transforming themselves, and then to bring the power and strength that they have to help other people. And if we don't move into a place where there is some kind of reconciliation, then there's a lot of perpetrations that are going to stay underground because people are too ashamed and frightened to admit that they've done something wrong.
Yeah, I think you like nailed it on the head. And I just also got a note from Scott reminding me the same thing where I was going, Scott, is what I was like, where you nailed it on the head is that if we keep going in this direction, we'll just keep perpetrating. Like, as a society, we'll actually, like, we think we're solving it, we're actually we're putting a Band-Aid on a gushing wound. And it's not actually doing what we want or intended to do. And how a lot of people talk about rape culture, and how many do talk about cancel culture. And then how do we find ourselves in the balance where we're not moving into rape culture, we're not moving into cancel culture, and like, how do we kind of stay in that space of what I believe is love, like, where we're being accountable. We're not going into rape, but we're also, like forgiving when we step out of the circle and learning how to bring people back in a safe and healthy way.
I think you said something really profound, Sadiq, and it's something that I often talk about, which is that shame. If we shame people, which is what cancel culture is all about, shaming people and driving them, to me, cancel culture, and I'm sorry, but this is just my opinion, is tantamount to putting people in stockades and pelting them with rotten tomatoes. I mean, we're just making examples out of people. And when you shame people, you shame, it's not just them, you start shaming anybody else who's ever done what they've done. And then you create a culture of shame. And that actually shame leads to more perpetration. In my own journey as a domestic violence perpetrator, I found that when I felt ashamed of myself, I was more likely to re-perpetrate. And the person who was helping me to grow out of those patterns was actually teaching me to go do something nice for myself, forgive myself, so that I can do better next time.
Right. I mean, it's so counterintuitive to so many of us. Like, if we actually are nice, like if we treat the one who is causing harm with kindness, that kindness, in fact, might be the very exact medicine that will heal them and therefore stop the perpetuation of that trauma.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you really feel bad about what you've done, the tendency is to want to beat yourself up for it. And that actually is going to lead you to be this person who's on this terrible hamster wheel of, I feel so sorry, and now I'm doing it again. I feel so sorry, and now I'm doing it again.
Yeah, Sadiq, can I comment on this conversation real quick? Because something's gotten more and more apparent to me is that that the cancel culture it's really like creating a scapegoat, because shame is the most toxic emotion that nobody wants to feel, that everybody just wants to get the hell away from, and everybody's got it. But like, if somebody shows up as a target for shame, then everyone pelts them with shaming, so they can vicariously experience another feeling shame, so that they don't have to feel it themselves.
Right on.
Yeah.
Yes. No, you called that out exactly. It is scapegoating. And scapegoating is all about putting our sins on somebody else.
So we're at that moment where it feels really juicy, and we have 20 minutes until our next part of the 12-day convergence. And we're going to need some transition time as well. And we're going to need to close this show in a good way. And
can I do something?
Yeah, please. Ah, beautiful.
So I would say the first thing, it's very tough bringing up parents these days.
This is my father.
Oh, hi.
And hang on, Mom just walked in with hers on. You need to turn it off.
Wow.
I guess the lesson, and I'll be 70 real soon, is what I've learned from my wife, who's much smarter than I, and there she is what we've learned from Sadiq and we've learned from Anna, is your cup is not half empty, it's half filled. And you just got to get up every morning and keep going forward and try to make each day a better day.
Zeke, I want you to know I love you very much. My apologies for not knowing and being there for you and your brother. When Daddy and I left you in the trusting care of your babysitter, please accept my hugs, holding you tight with my sincerest and everlasting love for you. I honor your courage and bravery for self-care, for family healing and communal outreach. I hope the steps forward will bring us to a level of healing that will bring comfort and joy to the whole family and those one reaches out to. Thank you for your help with during Anna's cancer journey. I could not have done without your expertise and knowledge of her care, and to take blame for it. We all can point fingers, but we're in this together. Again, I love you very much, and please accept my apologies and my outreach of hugs and love for you.
Ditto.
I love you. Thank you.
Love you.
And yes, I do accept your apologies.
Thank you.
Fully and completely.
And true lack of knowledge as parents.
Totally. Yeah.
Well, it was, regardless of what it took, you guys raised a true mensch.
Thank you.
Bruce and Elaine, thank you. Thank you. Blessings.
Thank you, Margie.
Thank you, Margie.
Thank you.
Add something really quick.
Yeah.
Acknowledge everyone, because like these conversations are going to change the world, like seriously. And hearing from your parents, Sadiq, you guys are just like so beautiful. It makes me want to like go talk to my parents right now and just cry in their arms. So thank you guys for holding space for everyone. Like this is just like really a dream come true for me to just hear these conversations. So beautiful. You guys are all really beautiful people. Whew, this is where the change happens, and I'm just so grateful to be a part of it and meet everyone who's in this Zoom room and watching an hour later. I love you all deeply. Yeah, that's all. Thank you again.
I actually want to keep you on the stage, Kenzie. Deep breaths. That was unexpected, and thank you. I haven't cried that hard in a very long time, and I cry. Yeah. Thank you, Scott, for being a conduit, a vessel, and yeah, for offering your stage in partnership with us. I love you. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Yeah. And what I want to share right now to conclude this space and time together is moving forward. You know, where to from here, and I want to do that on a few different levels. There's as I said, the me 3 level. There's the level of the context within the whole person convergence, which starts back up in 14 minutes. And to join us for the journey into the first realm of peace building and relations, go to our website. It's at earthwalkunited.org. Click on the little portal to the event and click on day 3, where we launch the Me 3 movement. And the context I want to really ground and anchor here in this time together before we move into, thank you, Scott, before we move into the next leg of this journey in the next 6 days of going through those 12 realms, is the context. So like, as Veronica said, like, how can we go through those 12 sectors during those 6 days from a place of love culture? That, again, it's not rape culture. It's not allowing for what we don't want that violates society, And it's also not council culture where we're saying fuck the billionaires and fuck this and fuck that. Like we're not doing that. We're giving space for those holy fucks. We're giving the place where we can say fuck you in a safe way and get out the anger and rage. I wish I knew how to do that when I was younger, 30 years old, with my sister. When she had that rage come up, I wish I knew, so that she could have expressed it then in a different way. But not to where we go into rape culture or go into council culture. And so as we go through the next 12 realms, we're going to look at each realm and we're going to see where there is trauma. We're going to see where there is pain. We're going to talk about it. But the invitation is to remember that we're all human. That we all fuck up. We all make mistakes every single day. I know I do. Every day. And we're going to look with that lens of love. And we're going to talk with that lens of love. And we're going to heal with that lens of love. And that's what the entire Me3 movement is about. We're starting with sexual trauma, but that's not where we're ending. We're starting in the place of the deepest, most intimate space, because we believe that if we can go there, if I could go there and heal that, and it's a never-ending journey, I have more to do, but if I could go there and heal what I've healed with that so far, I believe we can do that with all these other sectors. If we can go to the most intimate and the most painful place and heal that, going through the realms, and that's why we started here, piece of cake. Piece of cake. Because we've lent ourselves to the lens of love. We've lent ourselves to the journey of wholeness and healing. And we've said, I mess up too, I screw up too. So we're going to go into these realms and we're going to see where we all fuck up in education and in the environment and in this. We're going to look at all of those things lovingly, playfully, and we're going to bring the power of 3. We're going to honor that we all go through that cycle of victim, rescuer, perpetrator. None of us are exempt from my perspective. From my perspective, if you are, you're in denial. I could be wrong, but my perspective. And yeah, we're going to go there with love and joy. And as this moves, and as Me3 anchors in the realm of sexual trauma, we're going to allow that to expand. And we're going to start teaching Me3 methodology in physical violence, in other forms of violation. But we're going to ground it here first. And we're going to allow it to eventually grow to what we call the We3 movement. And with the We3 movement, that will allow nations like the Lakota Nation to come to the United States and say, hey, we have some trauma that we need to tend to. Or the relationships between Christians and Jews. We have some trauma that we need to tend to. Can we get an audience to encircle that trauma with love? Hey men, hey women, we got some trauma to tend to. The possibilities are infinite, but we're going to allow that to expand to the other side of a We3 movement and allow for a global loving justice community, helping to support nations all around the world through this journey. And this is why we have the 12 days, starting here, moving into how do we do that so we can create a global culture of peace. Earthwalk believes to get to that place, a global culture of peace, we need to apply love. Love is the vehicle to peace. Joy is the expression of that peace. And so that's what we're going to be doing today. And the last thing that I want to just say with that, and painting the context of where this is all going, with the power of three is the third piece of that triad of three is Tribe 333. That's Earthwalk's global tribe of peace tenders, people who are dedicating themselves to a life of peace. So we have the Whole Person Academy, which we're launching with this whole series to network teachers, facilitators, healers from around the world to teach wholeness. Well, we can't stay there. If all we do is stay up here in the lessons and we don't go to the place of practice, we can't keep this. So married to the Whole Person Academy is Tribe 333, which is a place of practice, building a global community where people practice on healing the triangle, how we hold space with peace. And so we'll be talking more about that at the Convergence. It's basically going to be a global peace dojo. And so with those three pieces, we are working to till the soil of a global culture that looks at life from a lens of love, from a lens of service to all. And once doing that, we till that soil. Then in that rich soil, we can create the new world that I believe so many of us here have been calling and into being and working daily, like Scott, like many others in this room, into being. So with that, I wonder if I can, Scott, bring you back in.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Let's keep these open hearts and open minds. The video will be available up with the link. It'll start as a Facebook live video. I also recorded it as a Zoom video, and I'll also have it turned into a YouTube video. So there'll be different ways to access it. Thank you, everybody. Let's have a beautiful Sacred Sunday. Namaste. And maximum grace for all of us. Take care, everybody.